In the previous video, we discussed what are the components of networking in Microsoft Azure. We discussed a little bit of VNets, a bit of subnets, how to add virtual machines to subnets. Today, what we are going to do is we are going to see how that is done on Microsoft Azure, how to insert things into the portal, how to create a network per se, how to create subnets, and how to add virtual machines on the networks, right? So we are going to do this in two parts, right? So the first part is going to focus upon that I'm going to create a VNet, a single VNet, right? In that VNet, let's add a couple of subnets. We'll add VMs to those subnets, and we're going to try to see whether these VMs can communicate with each other or not, right? If again, we are going to see that. The second part is going to be I'm going to create two separate VNets. I'm going to put one virtual machine in each. We are going to see if they are going to communicate with each other or not. If not, we are going to see how we are going to make them communicate. That's the VNet peering part. So how are we going to start with this? We are going to start with creating a virtual network. You can see it right here on the Azure portal. You have virtual networks right here. So I'm going to click on virtual networks, and I'm going to wait for it to populate in this case. So what I'm going to do, the first thing I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to create a VNet. I'm going to create a virtual network. Then subnet comes, then VMs come. But the first thing and the most important thing in this case is to create an actual virtual network. Now, one thing is really important with these virtual networks is first of all, where you are creating them, right? The location of these virtual networks is super important. If you are going to create that in maybe East US, then I would suggest your machines must be in East US as well. So when we have these things with the virtual networks, when we are talking about where to create them, you create them where your infrastructure actually lies. So this is, again, this is the infrastructure as a service part of the things. Okay, so we are going to click on this. We are going to see virtual network. So in this list, what I'm going to see is that what are the current virtual networks that I've already created, the virtual networks that I've been working with, right? So I have 3 virtual networks, but I'm not going to use these. I'm going to create a new one for this practical itself, right? So technically I should click on add here, right? And I will reach here. As soon as I click add on this, I'll reach on create a new virtual network. So that's what I'm going to do, right? As you can see it here, it tells me my subscription here is MSDN platforms, the resource group. Anytime you're creating any resource on Microsoft Azure, you need to have a resource group. You can't do without a resource group. So we are going to use a resource group that I've already created a resource group for this practical. Let's call that networking practical at this moment. Click on this, and yeah, networking practical comes up. Let's call our VNet as VNet -1. Okay. So what's the region going to be? I told you the region is going to be super important, right? So I'm going to go with East US in this case. Let's go with East US. Now, don't just go with review and create in this case, because again, you have to configure more things. This is just the VNet part. You are also going to have to create your subnets and all that stuff. So I would suggest go next to IP addresses where you can configure the subnets. Oh, by the way, don't worry about it. If you just review and create the VNet right here, you can later on go into the VNet settings and create the subnets as well. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. But right now I'm going to click on next on IP addresses, right? So it's asking me for IPv4 addresses. I can go with IPv6 address space if I wanted to, but I'm comfortable with IPv4 at the moment. So address space, it says automatically 10.1.0.0/16. You can choose anything else, any other private address space. You can go with that, right? So I'm good with 10.1.0.0 to be honest. So I'm not going to mess with it a lot more. So as I told you in the previous video, this /16 does not really mean a subnet mask or anything. This means that this is a range, right? This is a range of IP addresses. This is a range of IP addresses from 10.0.0. This is the first IP address, and the last IP address is going to be 10.1.255.255, right? So this is going to be the range, right? So these are going to be around 65,536 addresses, right? But this is a huge space, right? I need to break the space down into smaller parts so that I can manage things easily, right? So that's why we create subnets, because 65,000 addresses, to manage them all in one place, it's kind of hectic. So what I'm going to go with is I'm going to create a subnet. As you can see it right here, it has already created a default subnet. Okay, I like the subnet that they have created, 10.1.0.0/24. I'm going to keep the address, but let's change its name a little bit. I don't like the name default. So just because we are going to create multiple subnets, it's better to name them something so that you have kind of a naming convention going on. So just click on the name default, and settings are going to open up that are going to let you change the IP address and let you change the name of the subnet, right? Waiting for it to load to edit the subnet. So here we go, subnet name. So right now what I'm going to name my subnet is, let's call it subnet. This caps lock was on. Let's call it subnet 1A, right? This is the first subnet in the VNet 1, so that's why I'm calling it subnet 1A, right? You can keep any name. This is the one I'm comfortable with. You can see that this subnet is a range of IP addresses from 10.1.0.0 to 10.1.0.255, so 256 addresses technically. 5 are reserved for Azure and 251 are there for us to use, right? So we can put our virtual machines in this. Just save it. Okay, you can just go ahead and have just one subnet. uh, I would, for the sake of this practical, I would have to have 2 subnets in this VNet. So just single VNet, a couple of subnets, right? So I'm going to create these 2 subnets, and in both of these subnets, we are going to add a machine each, right? So let's go here. Let's go with add a subnet. Now again, edit subnet panel would open up, and it will let me add another subnet, and it will ask me again for the IP address and the subnet name. So hold on. Here we go, subnet name. Let's call it, for the sake of simplicity, subnet 1, my bad, subnet 1B. Okay, IP address range. Now subnet's IP address range has to be a subset of the IP address range of the whole VNet. Subnet has to be within the VNet. If you are confused about what I'm talking about, go to the previous video, check it out. We have discussed networking in detail, the basics of networking in detail there. But anyway, moving forward, right? So /24, again, this is a range, and again 251 plus 5 addresses as discussed before. So you have the 2 subnets here. I've added the subnet. We have 2 subnets here. This is all step by step. This is, we are not skipping anything. We are not going ahead. So we are going to keep this really detailed. Okay, so you can see within this virtual network you have 2 subnets already created. I'm going to go with review and create here. We can create the VNet. We don't have to worry about many things, right? Review and create. Now there's one mistake that many people do. A lot of people do this, right? What do they do is that they click on review and create and they forget about it and they move on to something else. No, when you click on review and create, it's just the review button. You have not created anything yet. As you can see it right here, its validation has passed, but nothing has been created yet. So don't move away from this page. First click on create. You are going to save a lot of time with this, right? I've wasted so much time because I forgot to click on create, right? Many people would agree who have been working on Azure a long time, right? Validation happens, reviewing happens, then there is wait, you have to click on create again, right? So submitting the deployment, it's going to create a new VNet for us. It's going to take maybe 30-35 seconds for us to create the VNet, right? So anyway, we have created the VNets, we have created the subnets, right? Now we are going to create the virtual machines. So we have already created the VNets where the VMs are going to be. So now the next step would be to create the VMs, right? And to deploy them in the VNets that they are supposed to be deployed in. So what's the next thing that we are going to do? We are just going to go into the create a virtual machine panel, and we are going to create a virtual machine in the same resource group, by the way, right? I was telling you earlier about how important it is to have the same resource group, right? So we are going to have the same resource group. same region as the VNet. So the VNet that you already had created was East US. So I'm going to choose East US for the virtual machine here as well, right? Then the image in this case is going to be Ubuntu server. It says that, but I'm going to go with Windows Server 2016 because that's something that I prefer. It might take a few minutes more to load the operating system list, to load the list of images here, but it's all right. So yeah, Windows Server 2016. Next thing what you're going to do is that you're going to put in the usernames, right? Usernames is basically when you're logging into the virtual machine, what's the name that you're going to put in. So it's basically the name of the user, as the name suggests, right? Then the password of the virtual machine. Azure does not accept 8-digit passwords. You need to have it for at least 12 letters, right? Now, inbound rules, inbound ports and outbound ports. Now, inbound port is basically the idea of NSG, Network Security Group, right? So there are virtual machines are there in Microsoft Azure, they're in a they're in a public network, right? And you want to access these virtual machines from your systems, from wherever you are, right? You want to access this virtual machine, so you are going to access it publicly. So we need to open certain ports on the virtual machine so that your request can go in. If you want to take the RDP, you are going to open the RDP port in the inbound rules of the virtual machines. What it does is, when you go with this inbound rule, when you open RDP 3389 port, what exactly does it do? It makes changes to the network security group. Network security group is technically like a firewall, right? I would not call it a firewall, but it's like your inbound and outbound rules of the Azure virtual machines in a VNet, in a subnet. All that can be determined by changing the NSG rules, right? You can change the outbound ports that are open. You can change the inbound ports that are open. So that is called network security group. So when I'm making changes here to the inbound security ports, right, I'm opening 3389. What that means is I'm making an exception into the NSG of the virtual machine or of the VNet that we are working with, right? You can specify it on a particular VNet. Now, next thing we are going to do is that we are going to move into the networking part of the virtual machines, right, to see which network it is connected to. Now, this is the first VM, so I want it to be connected to VNet number 1. The first VNet, I want it to be the part of the first subnet as well in the first VNet. So VNet 1, subnet 1, as you can see it right here. And I'm going to review and create this virtual machine, right? Important to press that create button, otherwise, again, you're going to miss out. Okay, now the second virtual machine. In the meanwhile, the first one is getting created. We can start working on the second virtual machine. Now, what I'm going to do is that I am going to create this virtual machine VM2, but I'm going to be creating it into the second subnet of the same VM, of the same VNet, right? So these two virtual machines technically are going to be in different subnets altogether, right? So that they are not sharing any network. Image, in this case, I'm going to choose Windows Server 2016 data center, right? You can choose any image again. Same way, standard stuff, put in the username, put in the password, right? Just put in the password a couple of times here, right? There is an option of Azure Spot instance. We are not concerned with Azure Spot instance. That is something else, right? So we are creating a regular virtual machine, go into the review and create panel. But before that, move on to the networking part. So you can see it right here, 3389 is open here as well, right? You can see it in the inbound ports. And now the next thing that you're going to do is that you're going to go into the networking part to check which VNet and subnet this VM is created, right? So let's see it right here. Network is VNet 1 and subnet is supposed to be subnet 1B that we created, 10.1.1.0/24. So yeah, subnet B, so that the VMs are in different places. Public IP will be given to the VM automatically by Microsoft Azure so that we can RDP to this virtual machine. Again, go into review and create. Whenever you do a review and create, don't forget to click the create button. Otherwise, again, you will think your machine is undergoing this deployment, but it would just review and validate it, right? So yeah, you see the create button right here. Press the create button after checking what's up with the virtual machine. You can see it in the networking, VNet 1, subnet 2, right? That's exactly what we wanted. So next thing what I'll do is I'll just press the create button right here. Okay. So yeah, deployment is underway. So I will go into the home button, wait for deployment to finish, and I'll check my virtual machines list, right? Let's see which were the virtual machines VM1 and VM2 we have created. Let's see if they're on the list. or not. Of course, they're going to be on the list because I just deployed them. As you can see it right here. Yeah, VM1, VM2, both the virtual machines running. Networking Practical is the resource group. East US is the location, right? So exactly what we wanted, we have got right here. So the next step technically would be to check if I can ping virtual machine 2 from virtual machine 1. Again, you think that would you be able to ping that or would you not be able to ping that? Well, that will all depend upon that which networks they're part of. Technically, they're on different networks. So let's see what result it gives, right? So I'm opening VM1, right? And this is like the standard stuff, how to connect to a VM, how to take RDP to the VM. We have already opened the RDP port. So I'll go and connect. You can see everything about the virtual machine. 10.1.0.4 is the IP address, right? So 4 is the first IP address as discussed in the previous video. So if you're not familiar with the basics, again, go to the previous video and check it out, right? So I'm just going to fast forward this stuff a little bit so that we can connect to this virtual machine. And it's just about to be open. And here we go. So we're on the virtual machine. How does it look like? It looks like exactly like any other Windows server. So virtual machines are exactly the same as the servers that you would have on-prem. The only difference being is that these machines are in somebody else's data center, in Microsoft's in this case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to ping virtual machine 2 from virtual machine 1. Both these machines are in different networks, of course. So ping virtual machine 2 with this. Of course, the name won't work, so I'm going to put in the IP address. So 10.1.1.4. This is the first IP address of the virtual machine, and press enter. What do you think will happen? It's exactly what you think will happen. It will not respond. That's what I'm saying. Being in the same VNet does not mean your machines will communicate with each other. If they're in different subnets, that means they're in different networks. That means they can't communicate with each other, right? So you can check the IP address of the second virtual machine. You would see it right here. It's going to be 10.1.1.4, 4 being the first virtual machine in the network. You can see it, 10.1.1.4. You would see above public IP address and stuff like that. That's something else, right? So that's basically to RDP into the machine. If you didn't have a public address, how would you RDP? Anyway, so just to confirm, I'm right now the RDP that I've taken is of virtual machine 1. Just to confirm that I've done the IP config to show you the IP address 10.1.0.4. I tried to ping VM2 from VM1. This is VM1 that we see on our screen right now. So what's the result of this practical? Does not work. Different things, right? So what's next? We have created single VNet. So next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a second VNet, right? Let's call it VNet 2. So I'm going to create, this VNet is already created. I'm going to create another VNet. In that VNet, I'm going to create another subnet, right? And in that subnet, I'm going to put another virtual machine. So technically, I was supposed to go into the virtual networks and add another network and stuff like that. For the sake of saving time, that we know how to create a VNet now. So I already created a VNet earlier. So technically, I'll have to go into add and do all that stuff. But I pre-created this VNet. So VNet 2 has already been created, as you can see on the screen right now. Just give me a second. And this is going to be the list of VNets that are already present. Let's see that. You can see it right here. At the bottom, VNet 1 is already there, and there is VNet 2. Again, you have to create one, right? I already created this before the practical even started. Okay. So just to keep things simple, let's see what's the IP address range of VNet 2 and what's the address space that we are using. You can see address space is 10.2.0.0/16. So that earlier VNet 1 was 10.1. This one is 10.2. So definitely different networks. Different networks altogether. So two different spheres are these two VNets, right? And in this VNet, I have already created a subnet. I have already created a VM, right? So let me show you how, right? So you can actually see it in the address space part of the things, right? You can see it, the address space right here, 10.2.0.0/16. Address space right here is going to confirm the same thing. You can go into these panels or these sidebars of the VNets. We also call them blades, by the way. So going home, we have already created the VNet, and in that VNet we have already created a subnet called subnet 2A, right? So what's the next thing that I'm going to do? I'm going to check about the virtual machine. There's going to be another VNet. In this VNet there is a subnet. I need another virtual machine right here, right? So let's see. You can see it, right? The VM3 has already been created, right? I already created that. You can, again, I'm reiterating, you can create it on your own, right? Just for saving time on this practical, on this video, I've done that beforehand, right? So let the VM3, you can see the VM3 configurations right here. 10.2.0.4, that's the first VM of the network. So of course, you can see the virtual network and the subnet of the VM, well, VNet 2, subnet 2A. So I'm going to just start this VM, and again, I'm going to do the same thing. So what I'm trying to do is, I'm going to try to communicate this ping this VM3 from VNet 1 that I created, from VM1 that I created. VM1 was in VNet 1, VM3 is in VNet 2. Will they communicate or not? I understand was the thing that you're thinking of. If things in different subnet did not communicate, how can things in different VNet communicate with each other? That's what we are going to confirm in this case, right? So I have tried to start this virtual machine, right? It's updating once again, and while it's getting started, it's going to start very soon. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go into VM1 of mine, right? So I go into VM1. What's the first thing I'm going to do is that let's go into your command prompt, right? So in this command prompt, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do an IP config just to check what's my IP configuration, 10.1.0.4. Of course, I'm on VM1, right? So what's the next thing I'm going to do? I'm going to try to ping VM3, right? Before that, really important, let's do 10.2.0.4 in this case. Let me get to that part in a second. Right, so 10.2.0.4. So this is the IP address of VM3, as you can see it right here. This is the IP address of VM3. What will happen if I try to ping it? Just hit the ping button and let's see what happens. Exactly what you were thinking. Request timed out. It will not work. Of course, they're in different VNets. So what if I wanted to make them communicate, right? What if I wanted to make devices across different VNets communicate with each other? Is that a possibility? Of course, that's a possibility. That's why we are doing this video, right? So what we are going to do in this case is we are going to go out of this. Hold on. Let's minimize it and going home. So what's the thing that we are going to do now is that we want to make these two VNets communicate with each other, right? We want to make VNet 1 communicate with VNet 2 essentially, right? If I can do that, that means, again, I have some sort of communication going on between these virtual machines. So when I try to make these two VNets understand each other, it's basically like you are establishing friendship in this case. We call that VNet peering. What is VNet peering? It's VNet 1 communicates with VNet 2 and VNet 2 communicates with VNet 1. Where does that happen? All of this traffic goes from Azure's backend network, Azure backbone network, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to enable peering on both of these VNets, VNet 1 and VNet 2. I'll tell VNet 1 to ping or to start communicating with VNet 2. I'll tell VNet 2 to start communicating with VNet 1, right? So how does that happen? You go into the virtual networks, right? You wait for it to load. You open the first VNet, right? The VNet that you want to connect, the VNet 1 in this case, right? Let's open that, and you would see the VNet blade in a second. So yeah, here we see the VNet blade. As you can see it on the VNet blade, I'm going to peerings, right? There are a lot of things that you can see it right here, right? I'm going to go into the peering spot, right? So VNet blade, go to peerings because I want to make a peer or a peering towards VNet 2. So go into peerings, wait for it to load up. You would see that there are no peerings at this moment, no results. It's not friends with anyone. It cannot communicate with any other VNet. We are going to change that. So add peering, right? Just click on add peerings in this case. Wait for it to load again. So what we are going to do, we are going to establish friendship between these two VNets, if you want to understand it that way. Name of the peering, what will you call this peering, right? So you can give any name. For the sake of simplicity, so that I don't forget when I'm creating a lot of VNets, I'm going to call this VNet-1 to VNet-2, right? Well, that's a simple name. So what I'm going to call it, VNet underscore 1 to VNet underscore 2, right? Of course, that's a simple enough name, right? So because it's now really important thing is that you have to do it bidirectionally. If you are doing peering from 1 to 2, you also have to do the peering from 2 to 1 as well. Okay. So now you can see which network you want to peer with. You would see, go into these settings, it will give you an option of which virtual network you want to peer with. You can see the options here. It is showing you the networks from the same region, East US. So VNet 2, it's showing you client VNet. Then there are other VNets I created as well, right? So I'm going to select VNet 2. I want to be friends with VNet 2. So, and by the way, you cannot peer with the network. You cannot peer with your own self, right? As you would see, cannot peer with VNet 1. So what's the name of the second peering? Well, if the name is VNet 1 to VNet 2, and by the way, you can see it right here. For peering to work, you have to peer from both directions. So 1 to 2, and here you have to peer from 2 to 1 as well. You would see the name of the peering, VNet peering from 2 to VNet peering from 1, right? So let's copy this and rename it to be something simple. So let's call it VNet 2 to VNet 1, right? Simple enough, right? Select the defaults. We don't want the gateway transit or anything at this moment. We are not integrating any on-prem devices in this. So we are going to stay away from gateway transit at this moment. So it's adding the VNet peering. It does not take a lot of time. It takes a few seconds, right? So it's adding the peering, as you would see it almost now. In VNet peering, you are going to see the result here is that it will show you VNet 1 to VNet 2. Of course, yeah, you see it right here. From VNet 1 to VNet 2, it's already connected. Peering status connected. So basically, VNet 1 is already communicating with VNet 2 technically. And if you, similar way, if you go into the settings of VNet 2, if you go into the blade and you see the peerings, you would see VNet 2 to VNet 1 is already present there. Earlier, we used to have to do it separately, but now they have integrated it into a single panel. So what's the next thing I'm going to do? I am going to try to communicate VM1 with VM3 again, because again, of course, VM1 should be able to communicate with VM3. Why is that? Because technically, like I told you, these VNets now talk to each other. So technically, the traffic from VM1 should go to VNet1 to go to VNet2 and go to VM3. Technically, that should happen, right? Of course, that should happen, right? So I'm going to go to command prompt, but there's one consideration that I have to do. Let's see. First of all, let's see the ping results here, right? There's one thing that I'm going to do. It's going to fail otherwise, right? I need to disable the firewall. Not disable the firewall. I would suggest that you create inbound and outbound rules for ICMP, because ICMP is the protocol that that we use, that ping uses, right? So you'd rather create rules for ICMP, right? I'm kind of lazy here, but for the sake of the experiment, you can just turn off the firewall as well, just to see whether it works or not. So technically, if you want to just see the ping test, you can do an ICMP enable, or you can just pass through an ICMP through both the sides of the firewall. So from VM1 and VM3, right, from both sides. I think I've turned off the firewall of VM3 already, right? So I'm going to do the same thing on VM1. So go to PowerShell, or if you want to turn it off by yourself through control panel firewall, you be my guest. So set net firewall profile -profile. I'm turning all the three of the profile of the firewalls off. Set network firewall profile. Then you will have to go with 3 different profiles. That's basically your domain firewall, private firewall, public firewall. So profile, domain, private, and public. domain public and private in this case. I'm going to just make this a little faster, and I'm going to disable the firewall. So hyphen enable space false. This is basically a PowerShell command. If you're not comfortable with PowerShell, you can do it with command prompt, or you can just do it with your GUI. So that's all the same, right? So now firewall has been turned off. So I'm just going to close the PowerShell here, right? What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to VM number 3. So let's go into VM number 3 in this case and try to connect to VM number 3. So the process is going to remain the same. Go to RDP, connect to RDP, put in the student and the passwords and all that stuff, right? Put in the name. I put the name as student to keep it all simple, right? So I'm going to speed this process up a little bit so that I can connect with all of this. Let's go student, password, and fasten up a little bit. Yes, here we go. Hold on. Now we are on virtual machine 3, right? So technically what you're going to do here is you are going to change the firewall settings, right? You're going to turn off the firewall here as well, right? So I'm going to go into control panel. This is another way of turning off the firewall. Go to control panel. Let's wait for it to open up a little bit. Yes, here we go. So it's open. Don't go to network and internet. You can directly search things, right? Go on top, go with search control panel. I don't like to remember things on control panel personally. So just type in firewall, go with Windows firewall. By the way, you can type in firewall. You can see I've turned off the firewall here. By the way, you can turn off the firewall from start menu as well. Just go to start menu and start typing firewall. It will give you an option to turn off the firewall there too. So firewall has been turned off. What was the next thing that I'm going to do? I am going to try to ping virtual machine 3 from virtual machine 1. What do you think will happen in this case? Let's see. So let's go to virtual machine 1 in this case. Here you can see the server manager and all that. Don't need to be too concerned with that. It's just a feature of Windows Server. So I'm going to go into Windows PowerShell or CMD, and I'm going to ping virtual machine 3. Ping virtual machine 3, which is 10.2.0.4 in this case. So let me put in the IP address here, 10.2.0.4, not 04, not 44, 0.4, 10.2.0.4, and press enter. Voila, you are now communicating with a virtual machine in a different VNet. What is this called? This is called VNet peering. If your two VNets can communicate with each other, the subnets between those VNets can too, and the devices that are in both these VNets can communicate with each other as well. As you can see, TTL 128, you don't have a network in between. So let's see it right here, loss 0%, right? And IP config, just to confirm that I'm doing this from virtual machine 1. Yeah, 10.1.0.4 is virtual machine 1. So I hope this has been clear, and I'm pinging to 10.2.0.4. Definitely a different network. You can do that. You can do that across resource group too. So the idea here is that I need to make my virtual machines communicate, right? I need to make my virtual machines communicate across the networks. Can I do that? The answer is yes. The answer is VNet peering. I know we did, like, there are two separate VNets. How will they communicate? They will communicate by VNet peering. If you have any confusions in this video, just write them down into the comments. I'm going to try to respond to the comments. If you have any other suggestions regarding Azure networking or Google Cloud or AWS, right, let me know. Let me know how can I help you. And other than that, if you have certain problems with grasping the concepts in this video, I would suggest you watch the previous video that was about basics of networking. So I hope this was helpful. So thanks a lot.